I think in the future, learning will be more open and more accessible and more varied, so that more people are able to learn in different ways and for different purposes across the lifespan, so that learning will be life-wide and lifelong. We might argue that learning has always been available, but often it was available in fairly narrow forms and to perhaps only a small section of the population worldwide. Learning will be more accessible, more open and more available freely to everyone at any time and for any reason.
There will be big changes in learning that will come down the line, and some of that is around the structures that we have in terms of a degree, looking at micro-credentials, just-in-time training, and the way that education is getting, I suppose, packaged into smaller kind of samples.
The future of learning is online and digital, because we need to follow and adapt to and be proactive with the UNESCO and United Nations development goals, especially in education, number 4, but also that the SDG 4 have influences and impact on all the other SDGs. And the only way forward is online to reach the education for all.
So the future of learning is likely to be much more flexible, more blended, more hybrid across the continuum of formal and informal learning. I think in terms of the process and who is involved in the learning process, I think we're going to see many more stakeholders involved. So it will be in higher education, academics working with learning designers and other stakeholders to make learning more engaging, and especially as it goes more online.
Outside of higher education and of other formal education, we're going to see online learning and online pedagogies coming into play within industry. Again, we can see that with some of the big industry players like IBM, Amazon. They're investing in education for their staff and their employees, and I think we're going to see more organizations utilizing online learning. The current model is often that people are spending a number of days attending workshops. That disrupts the whole work process by making certainly the theoretical elements available online that staff can do in their own time, and then perhaps coming for shorter workshops where they actually participate in activities that reinforce that theory. We're going to see those kind of changes. So it was just-in-time training for industry, and industry requirements will become a much bigger user of online education.
So away from higher education, online learning gives many more organisations such as NGOs and businesses the opportunity to upskill their employees or their target audiences. And so I think that there's potential for collaboration between universities and other organisations. So perhaps it's not so much that online learning will take away students from higher education, but that there will be opportunities for more authentic collaborations and curriculum development going forward.
Outside of the higher education context, online learning can be useful to people across their lifespan, from childhood right through to older adults post-retirement, for any purpose, whether that be employment related, upskilling, credentialing, retraining, but also for reasons that are personal and spiritual and to do with hobbies and self-actualization in the widest possible form. Online learning can cater for any learning, for any person, for any reason.
Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everybody, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you so much for signing up and attending this session today. The team here at FutureLearn have put a fantastic agenda together for the Festival of Learning, and I'm really privileged to lead the session today when we have a really impressive list of panelists. I'm Catalina Schveninger, and I lead the people function here at FutureLearn. Well, I hope this morning you managed to listen to Lord David Putman delivering the learning keynote. If education, according to Lord Putman, is having a Darwinian moment, I think learning and development departments within organizations, be it large or small, private or public, are also being confronted with a situation in which only the fittest prosper, given all the budget cuts or spend put on hold as everyone navigates this crisis. But they also benefit from an unprecedented pole position. Demand for corporate learning of the good sort has never been higher. Not in Ian's, Jonathan's, Amanda's, or my careers anyway. I've already mentioned my esteemed panelists. They will introduce themselves in a minute. But first, I have the pleasure to introduce Ron Kalifa OBE, the chairman of FutureLearn, and someone who is a passionate lifelong learner and practices what he preaches, as I can share from my own experience since Ron joined us here on FutureLearn's board. Ron's career demonstrates that he practices what he preaches. He was a CEO of WorldPay. He grew WorldPay from a small startup to be the premier global payments company for over 10 years. He lived and worked overseas and now acts as non-executive director on prestigious boards, in addition to FutureLearn on Network Group, Bank of England, TfL, Imperial College, and let's not forget the England and Wales Cricket Board. Today, Ron will talk about will not talk about financial markets or cricket, but will focus on how the C-suite can engage with L&D to future-proof businesses and unlock growth for today and for tomorrow. Ron, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Catalina. And I'm absolutely delighted to join all of you today. Thank you for connecting into what I think is a fantastic event that's been run by FutureLearn. I want to talk to you today for just a couple of minutes to give you a sense of why I believe learning and development needs to be in the DNA of a company's culture. Just think about the world the business operates in, even pre-COVID. It's an increasingly competitive business landscape with rising complexity and the digital revolution reshaping what they do, and also the mix of employees. At the same time, businesses are facing persistent uncertainty, a multi-generational workforce, and because of the pace of change, a shorter shelf life for knowledge. All of this, I think, has placed a premium on reskilling and upskilling. We've seen a shift to a digital knowledge-based economy. This means that a vibrant workforce is much more important than ever before. Clear data and research suggests that a very significant percentage of the value of a company is based on three core intangible assets. Firstly, skilled employees. Secondly, exceptional leaders. And thirdly, knowledge. I'd like you to pose a few questions to yourself. Firstly, ask yourself the question, how does either your organization or an organization you can think about, how does that organization think about learning and development? Is it a cost or is it an investment? Many of you will say it's an investment, but stop and ask yourself, does the senior management believe that? How much is spent on recruiting? How much is spent on paying search fees and placing adverts, employing people to sift through applications, interviewing and onboarding? Then ask yourself what is being spent to increase the skills of employees or reskill the person. How is that skill gap measured and identified? How is it assessed? How's it being catered for? And how's it being delivered? Those questions will tell you what type of organization you're thinking about and you're working with. Is it one that values learning and development or one that makes you question it? Many companies going forward will have to pivot or point in a different direction because of what has happened in the past few months with COVID. They will have to fund restructuring costs. It's an inevitable part of business. Is it time then for some of that funding to be redirected to reskilling and acting as responsible employers? Another question to ask yourself is, where are the gaps that you see across companies that you know and workforces that you know? Where are the areas where there is underskilling? You'll all have your own views based on the industry and the activities and the roles that you're familiar with. But for me, I think there are two main gaps which are almost universal. Firstly, yes, digital skills. I'm thinking here about user experience, mobile design, web analytics, AI, digital marketing, social media, cybersecurity, software as a service, data management, the list just goes on. The second area that I believe workforce generally is underskilled in is team skills. In other words, managing and working effectively in teams. In any organization, it doesn't really matter the position of the person. The ability to work with others effectively is vital, whether you're entry level or in the C-suite. The ability to communicate, collaborate, listen and have listening skills, adapting and empathizing all define the effective team member. But how much time is spent in helping the individual learn that skill? Team dynamics are so critical to the success of a company, but quite often it's overlooked. Many managers need to be trained to manage and be coaches. So many can't do that, and it's often the reason why, as you know, employees leave. Remember that the cost of upskilling or reskilling a workforce is 6 times lower than the cost of hiring and onboarding a new employee. It's a great life skill to help and guide and be the coach. I personally have been an advocate to reskill, train, and upskill. It's transformed businesses that I've been involved in, and importantly, transformed the lives of the workforce. I hope I've given you a few thoughts as we move to the panel discussion. I wish you well in your careers, and I hope you learn as you grow and grow as you learn. Let me hand back over to Catalina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron, and appreciate that you're also spending the time today and staying on for the end of the session when the audience hopefully will engage in us and ask questions. I think one number that resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with my panelists today and with the audience, is the cost of reskilling and upskilling being significantly lower than that of acquiring new talent in the companies. And I think that's a really good reminder for all of us, leaders of business, leaders of HR, L&D people, to remind ourselves, remind our leaders about that important number. Without further ado, I would like to ask my panelists to introduce themselves and the organizations they represent. I'm delighted today to have a thought leaders from industry, public sector, as well as consultancy. And I think they will agree with me that they all share the same passion to contribute to the work of the organizations they work for, to build a learning culture, and to make sure that nobody is left behind in terms of reskilling and employability. So I would like maybe Ian to start introducing himself.
Thanks, Catalina. Thanks, Ron, for a really great introduction. So my name's Ian Fordham. I'm the head of learning for Europe for Visa. As many of you know, Visa are a leader in the payments industry globally. I run a team of around 8 people who look after our 3,000 staff across continental Europe and the UK. I'm also part of a wider organisation called Visa University, who look after all of the staff and training needs internally amongst Visa staff, and also for client training as well. So we also deliver skills training for our customers and merchants and others as well. So great to be part of the panel and to contribute to the session today.
Thank you, and maybe we'll go over to Jonathan.
Hi, thanks very much, Catalina. Thank you for the introductions. Great to be on the panel. My name's Jonathan Marshall. I joined the Foreign Office many years ago as a diplomat, but the last 15 years, certainly I've spent in learning and development in various parts of the civil service. But most recently, I spent 5 years as head of learning for the Diplomatic Academy, which was a new startup based in the Foreign Office, but looking very much at the global workforce of 15 or 20,000 working for UK government internationally. So I also participate in groups which look at wider capability in the civil service, including the L&D profession. And so that gives a great view across what's an enormous organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's not very often that you see the term of startup and the Foreign Office and obviously public service coming in one sentence. So really looking forward to hearing from you. And maybe, Amanda, we go over to you, and instead of doing this pop, we'll maybe also, in addition to introducing yourself and the work you're doing as a consultant and a strategist in learning, maybe you tell us what are you seeing among your customers that the purpose or strategic intent of the L&D department is right now, before or and during COVID.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Nolen. I'm co-founder of a bespoke consultancy called NilesNolen. And what we do is advise large global 500 organizations primarily, and some governments as well, on their digital learning transformations. And also how to make L&D a real value generator for the business, not just a cost center, to Ron's point before. Thank you, by the way, for that rousing introduction, and thank you for having me. So to Catalina's question, what am I seeing in organizations like Novartis, Santander, AstraZeneca that we've been working with? Well, I'll tell you what we're not seeing is scrambling, rushing to get all of the face-to-face training that they had before COVID online as fast as possible. So instead of building remote working courses or even courses on COVID, strategic organizations are really focusing on the skills question. So how to align the business strategy with learning strategy. As well as, I would say, thinking about things like talent marketplaces, both internal within the company and between companies. So as the half-life of skills is shrinking, as Ron said, the companies that are able to join up how they're going to build the skills that they need today and the skills of the future with their learning strategy are the ones that are really successful right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Amanda. Maybe Jonathan, we'll go back to you. And could you tell us about the purpose of the L&D department within the organization? And have you seen any changes in that purpose and that strategy in the last 3 months?
Thanks very much. The overall strategic intent, if you like, of skills building in the civil service very much matches what Ron was saying about upskilling and reskilling. And I think part of the skills focus, and when you talk about the civil service, you talk about something massive, and so it's a generalization. It's always going to be wrong to some degree, but there is a big skills focus, and part of that is because of the structure of permanent careers. Not true everywhere, but you've got a lot of people who spend a long time in an organization or moving around the civil service, and therefore the focus is very much on building their skills across that career, rather than looking at retention, recruitment, and so on. There are exceptions. That hasn't changed, but what obviously has changed is that L&D, along with all its client groups in the organization, has been hit with these sort of massive organizational changes. So the challenge of flexible delivery of public services has suddenly accelerated in the last 3 months, whether it's testing and tracing, or whether it's delivering the furlough scheme, or changes to universal credit, or closer to my department, how to repatriate UK citizens, etc. Global supply chains. There's also massive new challenges, and that's been accelerated. So a huge amount of learning happening, unplanned by anybody in L&D, just happening in the workplace. I might say more about that later. And there's been a mass ripping up of organograms and job descriptions, which I think has many, many positives. Obviously, you have to be able to cope with ambiguity and uncertainty at the same time as the whole organization from Monday the 23rd of March working remotely, as opposed to just a scattering of people doing that before, talking about the London workforce in particular. So what we've not been hit with is a sort of big change in civil service terms and conditions. We've been hit with a massive delivery challenge and an organizational disruption, which I think we can exploit, and we'll probably have the chance to discuss some of those opportunities that are happening across all sectors and all organizations at the moment.
No, very interesting. And I think moving over to Ian, you are relatively new to Visa. You lead their learning and development across Europe. How do you feel that the value add of the work you're doing and your department is doing is perceived within the organization, and has it changed now during COVID, Ian?
Yeah, so I think we're very lucky. I mean, I came from Microsoft beforehand as their Chief Learning Officer for the UK, and I think two bits actually that connect the two organisations, I guess, is one is great leadership. So right from the very top of the organisation, we've got CEOs in the case of Visa, Al Kelly, who is passionate about curiosity learning and really doesn't need to be sold at all on the value, and not just from a learning perspective, but also just in terms of reskilling, the pace of change that we're going through as an organisation. So I think the whole notion of a Visa university, I think again we thought very hard about this. The organisation internally has grown from 30, 40 people to about 120. So there's quite a significant investment in L&D, certainly in the last couple of years. And actually the word startup, we are still in that startup mode. So very responsive to the things that are happening in the near term, but also started to think about how we can shift to virtual. So obviously that's a significant element that we're thinking about, and we had to deliver in a very short amount of time We had a lot of in-person training, which is obviously moving to virtual very quickly. But also, yeah, I think from the strategic point of view, I also have dual line management, so dual management from the global Visa University team, but also into the commercial team within Europe as well. So that gives me a real sense of what's going on, the heartbeat of the organization commercially, internally, but also how we can kind of position our services going forward as well. So we certainly did lots of things in the short term, so helping to support people in the widest sense. It's a very caring company. So how do we support things like just how do you work remotely? How do you manage being a parent? How do you support yourself? How do you work using technology in different ways? So some very practical, functional things that I think accelerated our value to the organisation significantly. And even in the last couple of weeks, we ran our first, or second actually, our Visa Learning Festival. Sounds familiar to the Festival of Learning, but we just had thousands and thousands of people globally take on those sessions, which were focused around growing yourself, growing your team, and growing the business. And I think those three themes really resonated. In fact, to Ron's point earlier, how do we kind of bring all those three things together to make us more relevant to the organisation that we're serving? So yeah, certainly lots of change. But I think, again, the leadership from the top of the organisation, and whilst we are actually based globally in HR, from a Europe business, we are commercially aligned to the real realities of what the business needs to do in the short term, but also over the coming months and years. So that really helps us in terms of our own organisation's narrative.
Well, very interesting. I think Ron in his intro was mentioning how, a message to CEOs, how L&D should be part of the fabric of the company, part of the culture, the messages you're driving. And you mentioned how you're getting buy-in from the top, and that's not a challenge for you. More and more, if you consume lots of content right now online, you see CEOs broadcasting just like us from their living room, talking about the importance of learning, sharing what they are learning themselves to upskill and reskill themselves in this time. And I think, Amanda, you mentioned Novartis, in my opinion, is one of the leading companies in terms of driving that learning culture, driving curiosity, soft skills, not just hard skills, digital skills, but also interesting to see how they're engaging with their CEO and how he's publicly talking about a learning culture. Any other examples of this, and maybe another pledge to have more C-suite and more CEOs come publicly and talk about the importance of learning, especially in these times when a lot of people are obviously impacted, jobs are being cut, people are being furloughed, people have to pivot their careers. So what is that you're seeing, and what would be your advice to the C-suite that you normally engage with?
That's a great question, Catalina. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing enough of the C-suite really endorse learning the way Vas is doing at Novartis, or Satya Nadella famously at Microsoft. And I think that's really what's missing. So the question is, how can we get them to understand that L&D really is a value generator if it's done right, and not that cost center, as Ron mentioned before.
So I think
I wish I had more examples for you. This is my point.
So maybe we pick the good ones, and I'm hearing Visa as well are doing good thing. Coming back to the purpose of L&D and how you're seeing that we're shifting from just delivering reskilling and upskilling, digital content with a great user experience, and shifting much more to lifelong skills, right? The fact that we are now helping people in lockdown to cope with well-being challenges, to have leaders lead remote teams for the first time in their careers. So if we're thinking right now, let's imagine that resources and support from leadership will be in abundance, there will not be a restriction. What would be the single most impactful initiative you would like to drive as the L&D department to future-proof your organization, to make sure that at the end of this crisis, you have the right skills, engagement, and mindset in place so that your company can, go back to growth and thrive? So maybe we go back to, let's say, the public sector, if Jonathan would like to pick this one up.
Yeah, sure.
Endless budgets and no restrictions. What would you ask for?
I don't think I'm going to ask for a budget, but I'm going to ask for a fundamental redesign of jobs, because I think job descriptions, rigid job descriptions, and even organograms do hold us back. And I think we should look, and so this is my desert island initiative, or my single choice, is to actually get a new model of how we think about jobs. I'm sure there are sectors and organizations that are very, very good at this, and there'll be pockets inside the civil service as well that work on a very flexible basis. But classically, and generalizing hugely, we tend to think of that 10% corporate contribution. You've got your day job, that's what you focus on, and maybe around the edges, you do some L&D, some formal L&D, you do some mentoring or some maybe shadowing, or perhaps you're a member of a profession or a community of practice, but it's very much at the margins. Why can't that 10% become 30%, 50%? Because what we saw in the crisis was that people were suddenly flung, from a sort of day job into an unknown situation. Either the day job had changed radically, or they were literally taken off to a crisis task force or a new directorate to work on things they hadn't worked before. We had a very good example in the Foreign Office of preparing for that. And it's an illustration of what I mean around job design. People were encouraged to join crisis rosters to get training, yes, but also to actively contribute to crisis work. And unfortunately, there's a regular diet of crises in international work, as elsewhere. So people were used to working in the crisis center. They were used to the gold, silver, bronze command structure. They were used to shift working. They were able to fit. There was a core of people able to fit into that very quickly, and then help to bring others up to speed. So I think there's something around being much more sophisticated about job design. It's not a classic preserve of L&D. It's more OD&D. It's organizational design and development, and it will require a shift in mindset in L&D, and therefore a shift in skills. And I'll finish on this point. My colleague in HM Revenue and Customs, Andrew Jacobs, has written extensively about the need to move from a sort of shopkeeper mentality, where in L&D you're minding a shop of products, could be a corner shop, could be a supermarket, could be very sophisticated, to what he calls a more engineer mentality, where you're in a small OD space, I suppose, looking at the learning culture, but actually thinking about how jobs are designed and structures so that you can future-proof the organization by getting people to learn about a wide range of areas and to practice those team skills that Ron mentioned at the beginning.
Very interesting point, Jonathan. I think Amanda and I were on a webinar a few weeks ago where the topic of how L&D is now growing into a function where you're not just taking care of the reskilling and upskilling curriculum, but also redesigning organizations and the future of jobs. That's really interesting. So I think at the back of this crisis, maybe there will be a moment in time where we step back and look at our own function, our own contribution. Do we also have the skills in place to help future-proof the businesses? But I think Ron and Amanda, I know there was a bit of a conversation before of, do we see enough C-suite stepping in and making sure that they position learning in the heart of the organization as a value generator? And maybe, Ron, could you share from your perspective? Obviously, you are CEO of very successful companies. You are now advising on boards. You have an interesting look across our industries. Is there a piece of advice that you could share with the C-suite to take learning seriously?
Yeah, look, I think it's a really challenging question because sadly, people think of this as a cost. They don't think about this as a revenue generator. Every business throughout the world over the last 3 to 4 months has been doing active scenario planning in terms of what's the impact of COVID on their business. This is a seismic change that's happened, and they're asking themselves questions around, is the business going to reduce by 20%? Is it going to reduce by 60%? And every business has done this analysis. As they do that analysis, what they're talking about is essentially coming to a conclusion, many of them, about refocusing their core business activities. Refocusing the business basically means changing the way that staff are employed. They may be on furlough schemes, they may be on whatever it is, or potential redundancies. As they repoint their business, they're going to have to think about how do the existing workforce serve what they need to do going forward. And those conversations are now starting to happen, but they're still happening on a cost basis as opposed to thinking about it in terms of growth. The way that I've always considered it is, if you think about L&D as a cost, then you're always going to have every analysis driven by the cost line. But if you think about taking the L&D proposals, and for those of you that are involved in L&D, I would say to you, think about the proposal to take to your relevant managers, teams, bosses, whatever it is, and put it in front of an investment committee. You have to have the discipline as well as they have to have the requirement. The discipline has to be that you can see what is possible. But what is absolutely needed is belief and conviction from the leaders. If they don't have that, then you are not going to succeed. The other thing I think I just want to raise based on something that was said earlier is that the type of people who are coming into organizations now don't want careers. They're not here to come and stay in an organization for 20 or 30 years, or even 10 or 15. They're coming in for a set of experiences. And I think those experiences are what's driving the way that people are hungry to learn more capabilities. So I think those are the sort of things that leaders have to bear in mind if they are to be truly successful in changing the way that their organization focuses for the next stage. Back to you, Catalina.
Thank you for that. Maybe, Ian, we go back to you, and we come back to the question of, if you will have endless support and resources, what will be the most impactful initiative like Drive? Maybe building on what Ron was suggesting, and how do you see that, especially in the context of changing jobs being impacted? I think your industry is a good example of that.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think a great phrase that I heard from one of our managing directors is work is something you do, not a place you go. And I think that there's a lot of sort of focus sort of now in the organisation I'm working in, where we're really rethinking the way work is actually delivered. So, and not just from a remote working perspective, but back to the earlier points around agile working, which again is often the confines of the tech sector, but actually now needs to be the kind of the norm for the rest of the organisation. So I think there's definitely some shifts going on in that respect. One major thing, and again, if I had a sort of wish list and a magic wand, I think would be around technical upskilling. And I think that's just not just about product knowledge and so on and so forth, but actually just a deep digital skills gap in many people in the workforce, and just understanding the way in which, for example, data can drive different conversations, not just internally in the organization, but also we can actually help support our clients. They could be banks, they could be merchants, they could be startups and so on, with a better understanding of data and how that can drive their business forward. Because I think we're going to see a big shift in the economy, and our narrative around that is how can we make that a more inclusive recovery. So we are starting to think about how we can digitally skill our partners, upskill consumers and so on, and that requires a very different mindset amongst our workers. So I think technical upskilling and particularly around data is one area that I think we're going to be looking at quite significantly. The other area, which again go back to my sort of previous organisation, which was hugely impactful, was around coaching. So that kind of coaching mindset. So rather than a kind of strict managerial structure and within the organisation, is kind of being more coach-like in our conversations and having a kind of growth mindset in relation to our work. So I think probably two things that I think are going to be certainly areas of major focus for us going forward: technical upskilling and having that kind of coaching, kind of growth mindset and resilience kind of skills as well that you need to be able to thrive in the new economy.
Well, that's very interesting. That got me reminded that this weekend, looking at what people search for as they are still in lockdown, the majority of the world is still kind of in semi-lockdown. Two things are coming up in searches. One is, I want to learn more about Excel. So interesting how we have this more sophisticated view of people need to upskill themselves on data, but really I think the need of basic Excel is still there. And the second most in demand search was what day it is, right? So be the groundhog dog effect of the world we live in. But I totally agree, and I think all the organizations we talk to from FutureLearn portfolio perspective, everybody is increasingly needing basic data analytics skills, and that seems to be a continuous focus. To be honest, 5 years ago it was not different than today. So obviously I think the L&D community needs to do some more work in terms of in terms of closing that skill gap. I would maybe go on to a more personal question. Obviously, all of us have been stuck at home for the majority, right? It's still not safe around the world to go to the office, meaning that a lot of us have had more time to maybe study, take a new skill, do another online course on FutureLearn or on other platforms. And obviously, a lot of time has been saved, but not commuting. So if, what is one skill that you took on during this time, and how was your experience? So if you maybe, I think later this week we'll have a session, education skills for educators. Now, kind of question to the L&D practitioners, what are you learning these days, and how are you finding that learning experience? Maybe Amanda, will you start?
Sure. So I'm laughing because I'm thinking the last thing I learned online was what to do when you're making mayonnaise at home and it separates. So doing a lot of cooking because I've been in survival mode with my 2 kids and trying to work full time with my husband as well, working full time. So that's the latest thing I've learned.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, we can't taste that, but next time we're in Madrid, we definitely want to see how you're putting your skills in practice. Ron, what have you been studying these days? Have you managed any to update yourself on any skills online? Have you been on FutureLearn?
Yeah, basically AI is something that interests me, and I've taken a bit of an extra interest in that over the last few weeks or last few months, in terms of trying to understand it, and also trying to understand where it could take businesses. What are the type of activities where AI could truly work? I think there's a lot talked about in terms of AI and data, but the challenge is it's not really applicable yet. So that's one area that I've been learning about. The other, which is a little bit stranger perhaps, is what's the future of digital currencies for the world? Will we be moving away from a cash-based society into a much more digitally led society in terms of digital currencies that are issued around the world? So maybe a bit geekish, but those have been the things that I've been looking at.
Thank you. How about you, Jonathan?
Well, I think the skill that it probably wasn't deliberate at the beginning, that I've really been picking up has been around using Microsoft Teams /Zoom /Google Meet and every other method of communication, because at the beginning you think, oh, this is just a simple video call or a meeting. But it's been interesting to watch how, and I work across various teams, how they've all developed different cultures and gone up the same learning curve in terms of how to use technology. So it goes back to the digital skills point for teams, and it's basic. This isn't coding. This is just clicking on the right button, remembering to mute yourself, and using the chat function, etc., etc. But there's a lot there. So people are starting to replicate some of the informal interactions of the office in a remote setting. So I would say that's been my main. It's not a sort of planned course, but it's been my main experiential skill improvement.
Yeah, and unfortunately, one skill that you can actually put in practice a lot these days, as we all becoming more zombies, right? The Zoom is. What have you been reading or learning these days, Ian? Could you share?
Yes, I think obviously I mentioned the Visa Learning Festival. Obviously, it's putting on a big event as you're doing now. It's a lot of effort and energy. It's like organising your own party and then not enjoying it at the time. But I did actually have some time to upskill and listen to a lot of internal colleagues actually on everything from future of payments to the Visa's company ecosystem to using design thinking as a growth strategy for your own career. So it was just great to be able to consume some of the learning that you're also communicating to others. And then the second bit, one of the things we're also really encouraging others to do, but we're also living our own sort of version of this, is leaders as teachers. So one session I was asked to do was a session for Visa staff who are parents and carers of young children. So put on a session actually talking about activities you can do, things that you can actually do to kind of manage your home work balance. And as a result of that, I was a high school teacher many years ago. I had to relearn the science of learning. So actually I kind of picked up on some of the FutureLearn material, but also going on to other websites and kind of understanding all the latest thinking around the neuroscience of learning. So I had to upskill pretty quickly, having committed to doing that session. So that was a great learning experience for me. And I definitely haven't got all the answers there, but yeah, it was a great experience to be able to pick that up in quite a short amount of time.
Thank you, and that was a product placement. Thank you for the shout out on FutureLearn. I think as we started this this interesting period, obviously in my role as taking care of the people at FutureLearn, I think I got a really good advice from our mental health champions. And as I thought I'm a very resilient person, I will not need any help. Actually, halfway through, I realized that in addition to taking care of others and the organization, we have to take better care of ourselves. So I now got into mindfulness, and there is a fantastic course by the University of Leiden on FutureLearn, which gives you the fundamentals of mindfulness. So you don't have to be an expert or a Buddhist monk, but I would highly recommend it to everybody, thinking about self-care as well. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, and we had really, really interesting viewpoints from across the industries. Thank you also, Ron, for being a very active part of the panel and not just delivering the intro. I would like to maybe have a round with a final word of wisdom in terms of your advice to the L&D practitioners out there on how to make the most out of this situation, and how we will look our function with hope and with a positive outlook going forward, and our role to future-proof the organization. So if you are to have a kind of final word, and then I see already lots of interesting questions coming in from the audience, so let's make sure that we have enough time to pick some of those questions. So shall we do around the horn and maybe start with you, Amanda, and then go Jonathan, Ian, and Ron?
Sure. So I was just reflecting on what Ron said about the importance of getting the belief and the conviction of the C-suite, but also I think it's using data to really demonstrate the value that L&D brings. And so we need to stop counting bums in seats, happy sheets, satisfaction scores, and even hours of learning, and really try to connect the impact of what we're doing with learning to impact for the business.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. Sure. I would say to all people in L&D, take the chance to promote pedagogy as people get more and more attuned to online and remote learning, because it has to be online and remote, virtual, blended, hybrid. I mean, there isn't much of a blend left, frankly. It's all online. So this is a chance to show your skills in design, because people think they can organize training courses, but they can't. They think they can organize online learning, but they can't. There's been some very amusing and slightly despairing tweets and sort of debates in the university community about the previously, shall we say, understated role of digital learning teams in universities, maybe not always at the sort of forefront of the university's business plan. Now is the chance to actually get in there and show and promote the science of learning, what Ian was talking about, and to make sure this is done properly and not just as a sort of casual add-on to all the other hundreds of hours of screen time that people are enduring.
That's fantastic. And for those of you who haven't signed up yet, I think on Thursday our learning team will share some tools on the science of learning and learning design. Thank you for. I think we're going to Ron.
Sure, thank you. Look, it's difficult to give advice to professionals who are already steeped in this and are significant believers. But I think I said earlier about using information, using data. You are, if you're involved in L&D, I think you are basically the custodians of the future of the organization. And I think it's easy to forget that that's your role, that's the task that you've got in terms of helping the organization understand the value of the assets that actually exist within the organization. So I think you've got a big part to play in helping that transformation, particularly at a point in time when history is being rewritten. So I think that's one thing I would say. The second is that people are going to come to you because of the nature of your role, and you have to help them understand the value that they bring. They'll be questioning their own capabilities, their own understanding of what they're doing, and probably their value as well. And the quote that always sticks in my mind is that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So I think it's really important that you use that as a go forward strategy to help the organization prosper.
Thank you so much. I think on that note, it's really interesting to see that none of you have brought up digitization and VR. We all talk about the human element, right? And how we can make L&D, the function that you create empathy, you have dialogue around team effectiveness, you help leaders going through these tough times, and that's really inspiring. I think it's very humbling to be in this profession in these times, and considering the impact we're having on the learners around the world. I think, thank you so much. It's been very, very inspiring and really interesting. I've taken a lot of notes, and we're seeing a lot of questions coming from the audience. So I think on that note, maybe if I can start by asking, maybe Ian, how are you seeing virtual reality? I think there's one key challenge that you have right now is distraction. There's too many devices, there's too many Zoom calls, but there are some really great tech innovations that are out there, like Oculus Quest, that may be good for focused learning. Are you seeing any of that adoption in your company or in the companies you were before? What would be your advice in terms of adopting VR, AR to enhance the learning experience?
Yes, so not so much in Visa, but certainly in Microsoft, it was an area that we were looking at kind of quite extensively. And I think, again, the commercial world was the part of the organisation where this started to come to fruition, and particularly kind of vocational learning as well. So people wearing headsets, for example, and getting kind of real-time data and information, whether they were fixing things on a manufacturing floor or lifts, or for example. So I think for frontline workers particularly, there's a lot of great applications of that technology, and also partnerships with universities as well on this. So some great virtual academies, some in the UK actually, that were kind of created trying to solve some real kind of business issues. So not something that we're kind of looking at like within the super short term within Visa, but one of the things we are looking at is still things like sort of gamification of learning. So a product that we're just about to launch internally is like, how do we kind of rethink the upskilling of people's understanding of product using kind of gamification and so on. So a lot of investment in that area, probably less so around sort of AR and VR, but certainly I've seen it work. Technology is quite expensive still at the moment, but certainly in certain areas like medical profession as well, upskilling doctors and surgeons to perform operations in real time is an amazing kind of use case. But haven't quite seen it in other areas of workplace learning, but I'm certainly excited about the potential.
Thank you. I think one question was addressed to you, Amanda. Would you like to pick that one up?
Yeah, there's a question here from Jane Morley that I had mentioned companies aligning learning strategy with business goals. And she says that she hopes there's still room for unaligned L&D. In a former role of hers, she ran monthly education discussions with guest speakers. Staff really appreciated the chance to discuss topics in depth, often cited in exit interviews as one of their favorite parts of the company, with no deliverables. Those discussions sometimes fed into strategy in unexpected ways. The company supported it, but might not have an L&D tied to business strategy. So in response to that quite long question, I'll say I think it's great learning for the sake of learning. We're all on board with that, I think, in this group. But if L&D does not show demonstrable value for at least most of their initiatives, I think they'll find that their budgets are going to be slashed considerably now, especially post-COVID, as cost is really being scrutinized. And the reason for that is that L&D is going to be seen still as that cost center and not a strategic partner to the business. So I think there's room for both.
Thank you. How organizations are thinking to address and enable mentoring as a way to support people in their career development, especially when working remotely, right? When you don't have the very active network, you don't have the conversations around the water cooler, the support of people around you. So has anybody done anything around effective mentoring remotely to support career development?
Let me come in on that one, if I may. There's a person who's a very senior individual. Actually, I won't mention the organization, but he has been coping. He's been working exceptionally hard, as many have, on an intense basis with screens, basically, simply because, as many of you will know, you're literally on the screen from 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever it is in the morning, non-stop. There is no break in between meetings. Whereas in a normal environment, there'd be a break between the meetings. You might be walking to the next meeting, having chit chat, water cooler chats, etc. None of that seems to be happening. So I think there is an issue that's waiting to happen, which really worries me, which is essentially about mental health. And I think mental health is on the verge of increasing even more and being talked about even more than we've seen in the past. And I worry about that. So I think one of the things that I've been doing is spending time almost to take that individual I'm talking about out of that virtuous circle of Zoom calls, team calls, whatever it is, and just spend time talking about almost nothing as a distraction. It's helped him to just stay fresh in terms of his thinking and his approach, as opposed to just being tense meeting on meeting. So I do think that many of you in your profession, just because of the nature of what you do, you'll have access to so many people. Most of people in the organizations will know you, and therefore reach out to them, help them to just alleviate some of the stresses that are taking place in everyday life, because we are going through a very, very unusual set of times and experiences.
Thank you. Another question. We kept bringing closing the skill gap. I think it's a theme that's been, a lot of ink is spilled over a skill gap. The reality is a lot of companies still don't have a robust skill assessment, skill baseline analysis, and the conversation is still around performance management and attrition and other numbers versus what is exactly the skill gap that I'm trying to bridge in my company. The question is, how do we switch the mindset of the organizations to go and get more serious and more number-driven around what is exactly the skill gap that you need, how you're getting people from jobs that are at risk right now into jobs that are in demand, how do you get them to know what their skill gap is right now, what skills they might have right now in the portfolio that are transferable. Any examples of great tools or processes or companies that are doing this right, and what would you share? What would you like to share with the audience? Not sure, maybe Amanda, you can share some from the work you're doing around reskilling and upskilling.
Yeah, absolutely. On the vendor side, there's quite a few companies that are doing great work in this direction. One of them is Degreed, with a recent acquisition of Adepto, as well as Filtered, which does some really interesting work helping companies build a skills framework that's really aligned with their business goals. Aside from that, one simple thing that companies can do is just simply look at job openings that they have that they are unable to fill. And that gives you a really good sense of where some of at least the immediate gaps might be.
Thank you. So really good mention on a couple of tools to enhance that. I think the other question was, as the L&D profession is pivoting to be more value add, I think we also need to kind of reflect on our own skill gap and realize that we need to be the experts in skilling, right? We can't just rely on our functional experts. We need to also get to understand, what the skill gap is, how you measure, data analysis, for example, what tools are there to enhance those skills, and so forth. Another question is coming from David Riley. What is there not more agile and disruptive training investment in staff development to challenge conventional thinking? So what interventions have you done in your organization to challenge conventional thinking and change that mindset? Jonathan, can you take that one? Have you done anything in this area that would be mentioning? Thank you.
I'll mention two things quickly, and it's a great question from David. One is around promoting online social learning. And I'm generalizing again, but we had a sort of fairly classroom-focused approach to knowledge and skills development, getting people to engage, not just with the sort of normal intranet or Yammer or Slack or whatever sort of base tools, but with structured communities of practice, online courses, programs, cohorts, particularly through using FutureLearn. I have to say, there's another bit of product placement, but we've introduced into the Foreign Office and Civil Service FutureLearn as a support mechanism for remote distributed communities of practice, people who don't see each other but are essentially doing the same jobs and really want to learn from each other. That has I think been an innovation. And the second one, and that also linked back, somebody mentioned in a question, the conscious cultivation of virtual communities of practice. That's what we've been pursuing. And the second one is an approach we tried around smart shadowing. So shadowing is normally or can be a bit painful, where you sort of trail around after somebody for a day or two, sit in meetings and generally get under their feet and watch them do emails. Smart shadowing was actually over a 6-month period of time with a bit of skills development, but following a live, in our case, it was a negotiations process. And again, we have a rich diet of those. Actually following lead negotiators and building your negotiating skills through a live example. It was amazing how much people got out of that, including the lead negotiators who found themselves being challenged by people who were rather fresher on the theory than they were, perhaps. So those are a couple of examples.
I think Neil is bringing up how about adoption of radical candor. There was actually a very interesting, conversation online right now. Companies are going out there, global companies saying that they put their performance, annual performance review on hold, that they're very cautious of just managing on output now and putting more pressure on people. How are you abusing that? And I think there is another element of, we talked earlier about L&D going more around job description, job adverts, becoming more of an organization designer. I think there's another trend right now that we're becoming much more talent experts. So how do you see the performance review, the implications and the links to learning? And have you heard of any organizations who have taken some radical decisions around either merging these two or stopping one in this time? Amanda, I'm not sure from your experience, what are the companies that you work with are doing in this space in blending performance management with learning, or doing anything more radical in this time?
Again, I wish I had more examples for you, Kat, because I definitely think it's time for us to rethink the way we're organized in terms of L&D on the one hand, talent on the other. It's the two hands not always talking to each other, reporting that into HR, which, so I think we will see some changes coming out of this, but not quite yet.
Thank you. I think, Ron, you had a question that was addressed to you. Let me go back and pick it up from the trail. And thanks for continuing to bring up lots of interesting questions. So I think Denise is asking, she's saying, look, I think something that we share with Denise, never worked longer hours than before. There's more time required by students. On the contrary, less time for learning that I have interest in, starting multiple courses that are not yet concluded. How do you get the C-suite to understand that the face-to-face environment cannot be simply replicated online? Are there any words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think the point that was just made actually is an important one, which is there is a question as to where should L&D sit within an organization. I, for one, think that it needs to be on an equal footing with HR and have its own seat in the executive committee or the board or whatever, however the organization is structured. I think the challenge is that unless you can get some aspects across into the organization and be vocal, convincing, and have the conviction that I talked about earlier, it's very difficult for the noise to be heard. So I do think that HR tends to have so many different things to deal with, and putting L&D into that is very hard. Where that has happened, you can see that you've usually got an enlightened CEO simply because of the fact that they've actually brought that function into the same position and level. But the most important thing is it gets heard. It gets heard and then talked about in an active way amongst colleagues and then acted upon. So I do think that it's a very, very important dynamic that needs to change in society.
Thank you. And I think as we have another minute, we'll do a very quick round of probably my favorite question. And apologies for it, I think I'm biased because I have children at the GCSE level. So what advice would you all give your children as they pick their study of choice and go to university, given all the learnings that we had coming out of this crisis? And we'll end on that note. So on this occasion, I want to thank everybody for your contribution. It's been amazing to have you here with such a diverse view of industries experiencing. I really enjoyed that. And this will be recorded and shared with audiences who couldn't join us live today. So thank you for that. But before we conclude, maybe we start with Ian and go Ian, Jonathan, Amanda, and Ron. What's the advice you give your children as they pick the study of choice?
Keep your options open. I think would be the one thing, and I think also there's a whole piece of often university in the past certainly has been kind of quite linear. I think we need to be kind of encouraging young people to sort of take lateral approaches. So whether that's kind of time within business, access to social impact projects, lots of different things as well. So they bring a portfolio activities and going on at the same time. I've also got my eldest son is severely autistic as well. I think that's another major gap as well in terms of, getting a whole group and community of people globally, as well as obviously, for my own son, having access to the kind of learning that they need to be able to help them going forward as well. So probably the two things together, I think, is that latitude, the breadth of experience as well as the single track, but also the accessibility issue, which I think is another big challenge for another conversation.
I've actually got 2 university-aged children, so I'm very, very comfortable in the knowledge that they wouldn't take any advice I gave them anyway. On that basis, I would say don't over-focus on the course. You're going to learn as much from other people as you are from the sort of formal elements of the education. And I think that's something that applies not just at university, it will carry on. I'm not sure if people need too much encouragement to do wider activities, but I think there is an element of coming out of the school system. You're very, very attuned to look at the subject as the main thing. And I think shifting that mentality to learning from the wider environment is probably the key thing. But they wouldn't listen to me anyway, so we'll see what happens.
So I'm up. My advice would be to consider a generalist education, more of a humanistic one, than a specialized education, because I think it's increasingly more and more important that we can connect the dots and make connections between very different ideas and not get stuck in our echo chamber.
For me, I think I would say education is broader than the course. Education will come from learning from others. It's one of the things that we do, I think, quite well at FutureLearn in terms of social learning. And the most important thing, I think, is to follow your dreams. That is where this comes from. This is about your heart as much as anything.
Thank you so much, everybody, and thanks to everybody who participated today. We appreciate your attendance, your great comments and questions. Feel free to reach out to all the participants on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I'm sure they won't mind. And I'm just encouraging you to maybe keep attending the Festival of Learning. We're delighted to have later today healthcare keynote with Dean Patricia Davidson at 4 o'clock. Then you also might be looking forward to the business keynote on Friday. We have Sherry Kutu, CBE. Looking forward to you giving us feedback and comments, and go on FutureLearn. Don't forget to hashtag to continue this dialogue online, and keep learning and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you so much, and thank you to the panelists. Bye, everyone.
Imagine a world where the highest quality learning is open to all, regardless of status, location, or circumstances. That's what we're building. We're FutureLearn. Our purpose is to transform access to education. We're jointly owned by the Open University and the Seek Group, world leaders in distance education and employment businesses. We've reached over 10 million learners to date. We're a multi-award-winning team with the skills, passion, and plan to deliver the best online learning experience. We offer a huge selection of courses from over 175 leading universities and organizational partners all over the world. We make learning simple, one step at a time on mobile, tablet, and desktop, so you can fit your learning around your life. And we underpin it all with social learning. What's social learning? Put simply, it's harnessing the power of the community. We learn best when we share and debate ideas with fellow learners, understanding different experiences and perspectives, filling the gaps in our own knowledge. It adds an entirely new dimension and creates a richer learning experience. We make all this happen with flexible short courses, programs, micro-credentials, and degrees. Each course is created by a leading university or organization and made up of bite-sized lessons. You can usually start learning for free. Short course upgrades offer access to all course materials and the chance to earn a certificate. Our unlimited offer allows you to pay once a year to upgrade on as many courses as you like. Paid courses offer a more focused, professionally orientated learning community. Sponsored courses help organisations widen participation in higher education or meet responsibility goals. Our programmes enable you to learn in depth with groups of courses that help you explore different aspects of a topic. Our micro-credentials allow you to upskill or reskill with short stackable courses that award academic credit or recognition of prior learning. We offer a growing range of accredited undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. Degrees are arranged as sets of courses which you can take flexibly, depending on how much time you want to commit each term. We also support our academic partners, public bodies, and various organisations with a range of extra services. These include course creation, quick authoring for faster course development and improved learning design, plus end-to-end support from your own dedicated team. Course analytics to better understand your learner demographics and what they think of your courses. Learner management. Guide cohorts with powerful course facilitation tools. Track and support individual learners. Income generation. A revenue share of paid courses and upgrades, as well as tools to attract learners to further study with your organisation. Employers can also use FutureLearn in the workplace to upskill or reskill employees. FutureLearn, transforming access to education.